He thought she was just there to clean. A quiet woman, a simple job, a one-day arrangement. But when the single dad followed her home, what he found waiting in the shadows of a broken-down cabin, 6 little girls with hungry eyes, changed everything. What began as a transaction would soon become a miracle neither of them saw coming. If you believe in stories where kindness rewrites destiny and love shows up in unexpected places, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and settle in, because this is a story that just might stay with you long after the final word. The door was wide open. Cal Bennett knew he hadn't left it that way. Snow blew in across the hardwood floor like a slow-moving ghost, curling around the boots he hadn't taken off since morning. The fire in the hearth had gone out hours ago, leaving the log cabin cold and silent, except for the low creak of the rocking chair swaying back and forth. He froze. The coffee table was bare. The coat hook by the door, where he always kept his wallet when he worked in the woods, was empty. His wallet was gone. And so was the woman he'd hired just that morning. Damn it, Cal muttered under his breath, running a hand through his damp hair. He grabbed his coat from the back of the dining chair, shoved his truck keys into his pocket, and stomped out into the snow, slamming the door behind him with more force than necessary. He wasn't angry. Not really. He was disappointed. Again. Another person, another story. Another quiet hope crushed by a quiet crime. He'd thought she was different. Quiet, yes, but polite. Dignified in that strange, tired way people have when they've had everything taken from them and still manage to stand upright. He remembered her name. Ruby Hart. She hadn't given it easily, hadn't looked him in the eye either. But her voice was steady, and her hands were quick and gentle with the dusting cloth. And now she was gone, along with $60 in cash and a feeling he should have known better by now. The old pickup rumbled to life in protest. Cal eased it onto the county road, his headlights cutting through the late afternoon snowstorm. Montana winters didn't forgive. He caught sight of faint bicycle tracks veering off toward the tree line, fresh, narrow, and clearly unmeant for this weather. The kind of trail left by someone desperate. He followed. It took 30 minutes of bumpy turns and silence before he saw it. A cabin. No, not even a cabin. More like a shed that had once dreamed of being a home. Tin roof sagging under the weight of snow. Windows fogged. A thin trail of smoke curling from a crooked chimney. And a single bicycle leaning against a post. He got out. There was no doorbell. Only a battered screen door that swung when the wind hit it. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped when the door opened slowly, almost reluctantly. And what he saw made him forget every angry word he'd rehearsed on the drive over. 6 little girls. Barefoot, wrapped in mismatched clothes too thin for this kind of cold. Their cheeks flushed, raw lips, cracked hair tangled. They stood shoulder to shoulder behind Ruby, whose back was to him, her frame slightly bent, as if shielding them with her body. She was holding something in her hand, a basket. Empty. Cal didn't speak at first. His throat had gone dry. Ruby didn't turn around. She just said quietly, almost like a confession, "I was going to bring the money back." "That's not why I'm here," he said. Silence. Then the smallest of the girls, a little blonde thing with oversized mittens and eyes far too solemn for her age, stepped forward. Do you have any bread?" Cal looked down at her. She was maybe 6, maybe younger. And she wasn't begging. She was just hoping. Ruby's voice cracked. "We haven't eaten since yesterday morning. I thought I could clean make enough for something small." She finally turned to face him. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her lips were trembling, not just from the cold. Her coat, if it could still be called, that was more patches than fabric. She held up the basket with both hands, as if it explained everything. "I didn't steal," she whispered. I survived. Cal didn't move, didn't speak. For a long, heavy moment, he just stood there, watching 6 little girls shiver behind a woman who had nothing left to give but her body as a shield. Then finally, he took off his coat and laid it over the shoulders of the smallest girl. He turned to Ruby. You clean cabins for cash, he said. But tell me Ruby Hart who's been cleaning up after you. That was when she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a slight shake in her shoulders, a single tear down her cheek. I don't get to break, she said. Not when they're looking at me like I can still make the world safe. Cal looked past her at the girls behind her. One had a loose tooth, wiggling it with her finger. Another held a stuffed animal so threadbare its eye was hanging by a string. The tallest one tried to act like she wasn't scared, all of them waiting, watching. And for reasons he couldn't explain, not to himself. Not then, he made a choice that would change his life. I've got soup in the truck, he said. Ruby blinked. What soup? Blankets, too. And firewood. And if you'll let me, I'll drive you all back to the cabin. It's warm there. Safer. He saw the flicker of distrust in her eyes. The silent, lifelong conditioning that said, people don't help without expecting something in return. Then Maisie the little blonde reached for his hand, and Ruby finally nodded. As they walked toward the truck, 6 little girls bundled in hand-me-downs and bravery. Cal glanced at Ruby once more. I hired you to clean my cabin, he said. Didn't realize you'd end up cleaning something else entirely. Ruby gave him a sideways glance. What? He shrugged, eyes forward. The dust off a heart that thought it was done caring. And behind them, in that half-collapsing shack, the empty basket swung gently from its hook, finally no longer needed. The soup was gone in minutes. It hadn't even made it to bowls, just paper cups. Cal kept in his glove box, passed around like rations in a war camp. 6 girls huddled close together on the floor of his cabin, still in their patchwork layers, steam rising off the tips of their noses as they blew on the soup with reverent care. Sophie Cal's 10-year-old daughter stood frozen in the hallway, peeking around the corner. She didn't say a word. She just stared. Cal met her eyes and gave the slightest shake of his head. Not now. She pulled back, but he knew she wouldn't go far. His daughter had a long memory and a sharp eye. She would wait, but questions were coming. Ruby sat near the hearth, back straight, legs folded beneath her. The fire behind her crackled like it had been waiting for her to return. She hadn't eaten. Cal noticed that. Instead, she watched the girls like a sentry at post, counting each spoonful, checking for signs of exhaustion or fever, wiping a chin here, brushing a strand of hair aside there. Her hands never stopped moving, but her face was still as stone. The kind of stillness that only came from holding too much for too long. Cal leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. He didn't say anything. He'd learned long ago during the long hours in burning buildings, waiting for a wall to give or a beam to fall, that some silences said more than shouting ever could. After a while, Ruby rose and followed him to the kitchen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the empty soup pot. I'll wash it. No need, he said gently. I'll wash it anyway. He let her. She scrubbed with unnecessary force, as if scouring away guilt rather than broth. When she finished, she set the pot down with a soft clink and didn't look up. They're not mine, she said. Cal waited. They were left. One at a bus stop. One on a doorstep in the dead of winter. Another I found asleep behind a gas station dumpster. I didn't mean to collect them. I just couldn't walk away. She finally looked at him. Her eyes weren't wet. Not yet. But there was a thin shimmer just beginning to form. I know what this looks like, she said. A woman with no income, No legal claim squatting in a place that should have collapsed 10 years ago, hoarding children like stolen treasure. Cal's jaw clenched. Not from anger, just pressure. That low, dull pressure of knowing exactly what someone had been through without ever having lived it yourself. "You're not hoarding them," he said. "You're saving them." Ruby laughed once bitterly. "You sound like someone who still thinks the world's fair." "I don't," he said, voice low. "I used to, back when I still believed people couldn't disappear in plain sight. Before I learned sometimes the worst burns are the ones no one sees." She turned fully to him now. "You were a firefighter." "Yeah. For how long? Long enough to know some things can't be put out." That silenced her. Cal stepped away from the counter and walked to the window. Snow still fell softly outside, the kind of steady, quiet snow that made the world feel slower. He didn't want to tell her the whole truth. Not yet. Not about the accident. Not about the house fire that claimed his wife while he was out on a call. Not about how his daughter had watched it happen from the neighbor's porch. He wasn't ready. But he wanted her to know he understood more than she thought. "You could have run," he said. "Taken the money, disappeared. I was going to. But you didn't." She shook her head. "Maisie said she had a dream. That we'd find a man with kind eyes and a wood cabin, and he'd give us soup and let us stay." Cal chuckled. "Sounds like she reads too many fairy tales. She can't read." That silenced him too. They stood there a moment longer, two strangers bound by an invisible thread neither of them had asked for. Then from the hallway, "Dad. Sophie." He turned. "Yeah, sweetheart." She stepped into the room, still in her pajamas, arms folded tight. "Who are they?" Cal looked to Ruby. She gave him a nod, one that said, "This is your home, your daughter." "They're guests," he said. "For now." Sophie frowned. "How long is for now?" "I don't know. Are they sleeping here?" "Yes." She paused. "Is Maisie okay?" She looked kinda pale. Cal blinked. "You remember her name? I gave her my blanket," Sophie said simply. She said thank you with her eyes closed. Ruby's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'll get the mattresses," Cal said. "Wait." Ruby stepped forward. "I'll help." "No need. You've done enough. I'll help anyway." That night, after everyone was settled, 6 girls curled in sleeping bags beside the fire. Sophie sleeping in her room with the door ajar. Cal sat on the porch with a mug of coffee gone cold. Ruby joined him wearing a flannel shirt of his over her coat. He didn't look at her when he said it. "I didn't want this. I know. But I think maybe it's what I needed." She didn't reply. But when he offered her the last sip of coffee, she took it. No hesitation. And for the first time in a long, long while, Cal didn't feel like he was living in a burned-out frame of a life. Something had moved, shifted, like embers beneath ash waiting to catch. The smell of bread woke him. Cal sat up on the old leather couch, blinking in the morning light. The cabin was warm, the fire still smoldering in the hearth, thanks to someone who had clearly gotten up earlier than him. It took a moment to remember. The night before, the girls. Ruby. He swung his legs to the floor and rubbed his neck. The ache in his lower back reminded him he wasn't 25 anymore. Voices trickled in from the kitchen. No, Maisie, don't press so hard. It's dough, not clay." A small giggle. "But it's squishy, like clay. Clay doesn't turn into dinner, sweetheart." Cal smiled despite himself and walked slowly toward the sound. In the kitchen, Ruby stood at the counter, sleeves rolled past her elbows, hands dusted in flour. 6 little girls stood around her well, 5 technically. Maisie was standing on a wooden crate so she could reach the dough. She was elbow-deep in a bowl that looked far too large for her tiny frame, her cheeks speckled white, and her grin wide enough to make any grown man forget the world had ever been cruel. Ruby glanced up. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. Cal broke the silence. "Is that my last bag of flour?" Ruby arched an eyebrow. "Would you prefer I fed them air and promises?" He chuckled. "Touché." He stepped closer and surveyed the scene. It looked like a flour bomb had gone off. There was dough in places dough wasn't supposed to be. Butter smeared on the counter. A dozen hand-formed rolls resting on a sheet pan that might have seen better decades. "You let them cook?" he asked, feigning horror. Supervised chaos. They needed something to do, and they needed to feel useful. They're kids. So was I when I learned to knead bread with my grandmother. Ruby said, her tone softer now. Sometimes when you feel small, doing something useful makes you feel human again. Cal looked down at the girls. One was humming. Another was carefully shaping a roll into a bunny. The tallest Sadie, he thought, was trying her best not to cry over a misshapen lump that refused to rise. He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Maisie looked up. "Do you want to help Mr. Cal?" He hesitated. "I haven't baked anything since a high school home ec class." "And I failed that." She giggled. "You can knead with me. Ruby says I have the strongest hands." "I bet you do," he said, smiling. "All right, let's see what I can do." He rolled up his sleeves and stepped into the circle of tiny hands and flour clouds. Ruby handed him a small piece of dough, and before he knew it, he was kneading alongside a 7-year-old with enough spirit to light a small city. For the first time in years, he felt not just alive, but present, and it scared him a little. An hour later, the bread went into the oven, and the girls dispersed to their coloring books and hand-me-down toys in the living room. Sophie had joined them silently, a little slower than the others, but she was there, watching. Cal leaned on the counter, sipping his coffee. Ruby stood beside him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He broke the silence. "You've done this before." Ruby looked at him. "This taking care of kids that weren't yours?" She nodded. "More than I ever expected." Why her fingers toyed with the edge of her sleeve? Because no one did it for me. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Cal nodded. "You ever think about getting legal custody, foster system adoption, something more official?" Ruby gave a bitter laugh. "You think the system would let me, unemployed, no address, 6 kids I can't prove I didn't kidnap?" He fell silent. She continued. "I've tried. Twice. They said I was unstable, a liability. One caseworker told me I had too much compassion and not enough structure. Like love was something dangerous if you didn't have a W-2 to back it up." Cal's jaw tensed. He knew systems, knew how easy it was to fall through cracks the size of canyons. "They're wrong," he said quietly. Ruby shrugged. "Maybe. But I don't have the luxury of fighting the court while trying to keep them warm and fed. So I choose the latter." He looked at her, really looked. The way her shoulders stayed just slightly tight, like she never fully relaxed. The dark under her eyes, the scar at her temple. The way she always stood between him and the girls even when she didn't realize it. "You sleep last night?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "Define sleep." "I'll take that as a no." She offered a half smile. "Mothers don't sleep." "Not really. You're not their mother." Ruby's eyes flashed. "Don't ever say that in front of them." He held up his hands. "I meant it in the legal sense, not the heart sense." She calmed. "Right." There was a long silence. Then Cal said, "You know, you could stay." She turned slowly to him. "In the cabin. I mean, at least for now. The girls can stay too. There's room. Not much, but more than you had." She didn't answer immediately. "I've been living in this place for 3 years," he said. "Since after, well, you probably guessed. I don't talk much about it. But it's been quiet. Too quiet. Still, she said nothing. He exhaled. Look, I'm not asking for anything. I'm not trying to. I just think maybe we can both stop surviving for a while and just exist. Ruby looked down at the counter. Then Maisie ran in, waving a crayon, drawing in the air. Look, it's all of us. I drew Ruby and me and the girls and Sophie and Mr. Cal, and we're all sitting at the same table. Cal glanced down at the picture. 8 tiny stick figures, 1 big table, a loaf of bread in the center glowing like a treasure. Ruby met his eyes, and in that moment something wordless passed between them. Not a promise. Not yet. But the first fragile crack of a wall beginning to let in light. The cough came in the middle of the night. Short. Dry. But sharp enough to break through Cal's sleep like a fire alarm. He sat up on the couch, blinking in the darkness, heart thudding from the sudden jolt. Then came another. He tossed aside the quilt and walked barefoot across the cold cabin floor. The fire had died down, just embers now. Shadows flickered across the living room, where 6 little bodies lay curled in blankets and borrowed sleeping bags. It was Maisie. She was half sitting, her breath shallow and quick, her cheeks flushed red, her small chest rising too fast beneath the sweatshirt Ruby had tucked around her earlier. Her little fist gripped the edge of the blanket, and she looked disoriented, glassy-eyed. Cal knelt beside her. Hey, kiddo, he said gently. You all right? She didn't answer, just coughed again, a rasp that made him wince. He reached out a hand to her forehead, then hesitated. He hadn't touched anyone not like that in a long time. But instinct beat hesitation. The heat from her skin shocked him. She was burning up. He stood instantly. Ruby. No response. Ruby, he said louder, turning down the hallway toward the guest room. The door opened before he could knock. Ruby stood there, already dressed, hair tied back. Eyes heavy but alert, a mother who never truly slept. I heard she said, Maisie. She's burning. Ruby brushed past him and was at Maisie's side in seconds. She knelt and gathered the child into her arms, checking her pulse, brushing the damp hair from her face. I've been watching her, Ruby murmured. She was sluggish earlier, but said she was fine. I should have. You're doing everything right, Cal cut in. Let's just get her cooled down. Ruby nodded, trying to stay composed, but her hands trembled as she lifted Maisie into her lap. The other girls stirred, blinking in confusion. What's wrong with Maisie? One whispered. Is she sick? Shh, Ruby soothed. She just needs a little help cooling off. Go back to sleep, darlings. Everything's all right. Cal turned to Sophie's room. She met him in the doorway. I heard she'd said. No panic, no confusion, just a quiet steadiness that surprised him. I need your help, he said. We need cold cloths, your mom's old heating pad, the thermometer. She didn't hesitate, already on it. He watched her retreat into the linen closet and felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of pride and guilt. Sophie had grown up in the silence he'd built around himself, and somehow she'd still managed to keep her heart open. By the time he turned back, Ruby had Maisie on the couch, bundled in a thin sheet. Her hands moved with trained efficiency, checking vitals, whispering reassurances. But Cal could see the crack forming beneath her calm. She wasn't okay. He handed her the thermometer. Do you want me to? She nodded, eyes locked on Maisie's flushed face. A minute passed. Then the beep. 104, too high. Ruby didn't flinch, but her lips parted just slightly. A breath she didn't want anyone to see. We need to bring this down, she said, standing. Do you have Tylenol in the medicine drawer back left? She was already moving before he finished the sentence. Maisie let out a soft whimper, and Cal knelt beside her again. Hey, little warrior, he murmured. We're right here, okay? You're not alone. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused. Is Ruby mad at me? His throat tightened. No, sweetheart. She's just scared. That means she loves you. Maisie nodded faintly, then closed her eyes again. 30 minutes later, the fever began to drop. The cloths had gone cold. The meds were kicking in. Maisie's breathing slowed to something closer to normal, and her tiny frame stopped shivering. Ruby sat beside her, shoulders sagged, not from relief but from exhaustion. Cal brought her a glass of water. She stared at it for a moment, then took it with both hands like it might shatter. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. "You okay?" She nodded too quickly. "You're lying," he said. She didn't answer. He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "I've been there," he said. "Too many nights by a hospital bed. Too many times holding my breath for someone else's heartbeat." She glanced at him. "Your wife," he nodded slowly. "Stomach cancer. Diagnosed too late. 1 year from start to finish. Sophie was 6, I'm sorry. So am I." Silence hung heavy. Ruby stared at the fire, her eyes distant. "I lost a girl once, when I was working with an outreach clinic near the border. Her name was Anna, 6 years old. Came in with a fever just like this. But we didn't have the medicine. She died in my arms." Cal's heart sank. "I never forgot the way she looked at me," Ruby continued. "Like I was supposed to fix it. Like I'd promised something just by being there." She took a long breath. "That's why I couldn't leave Maisie in that alley. Or Lila in the church pew. Or any of them. Because every time I see Anna's face again, and I swear, I won't fail another one." Cal leaned forward. "You didn't fail her. You were the only one who stayed." She met his eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. That morning, as the sun rose pale over the snow-draped trees, Cal walked into the kitchen and found Sophie curled up on the couch beside Maisie, gently stroking her hair. Ruby stood in the doorway, watching. "She stayed up all night," she whispered. "Didn't ask. Didn't tell me. Just stayed." Cal smiled. That's her mother's spirit, quiet strength. Ruby turned to him. "She's a good kid. She's better than I deserve." There was a beat of silence. Then Ruby said, "You're wrong about that." He looked at her. And in that moment, before the coffee brewed, before the house stirred awake, Cal realized something had changed. This wasn't a house full of strangers anymore. It was becoming something else entirely. A family being born in the ashes of what had been lost. The tin box was dented, dust-covered, and wedged between 2 weathered cookbooks at the back of the cabinet above the fridge, where Ruby thought no one would ever look. Cal wasn't snooping. He was reaching for an old thermos when the edge of his hand bumped the box, sending it tumbling down with a sharp clang that made him wince. He caught it before it hit the floor. It felt heavier than it looked. He turned it over in his hands. No lock, no label. Just the kind of box that once held cookies or Christmas cards, and now held something else. He almost put it back. Almost. But something in him, curiosity instinct, or just the quiet ache of knowing Ruby carried more than she let on, told him not to. He sat down at the table alone in the early afternoon stillness. The kids were outside building snow forts with Sophie, and Ruby had gone into town with one of the older girls to pick up donated clothes from the church pantry. The box creaked open. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written on folded scraps of mismatched paper, receipts, napkins, notebook pages. Every one of them neatly dated and addressed the same, "Dear Mom." Cal's breath caught. He unfolded the first. "Dear Mom, today I found another girl. Her name's Lila. She has burn marks on her back. She still says thank you when I give her a blanket. She didn't cry, though." "I did." He picked up another. "Dear Mom, I couldn't sleep again. Maisie keeps coughing in her sleep and the shelter ran out of medicine. I miss your hands. They always knew what to do. I wish I was more like you. Or maybe I already am, and that's why I can't walk away from any of them. The third letter was written on the back of a paper plate. Dear Mom, I'm so tired. But they're still looking at me like I have answers. Like I'm not making this up as I go. I wish you were here. I wish I wasn't so scared. I don't even know if I'm doing the right thing anymore. But I'm trying. I promise I'm trying. By the fourth letter, Cal stopped reading. He leaned back in his chair, hands resting on the edge of the box, eyes closed. He had known pain, but not this kind. This was the ache of someone who had built a dam of silence just to keep from drowning and still leaked grief in the quiet between sunrise and survival. When the front door creaked open, he didn't move. Ruby entered arms full of a cardboard box. She stopped cold when she saw the tin on the table. Her face changed. Not panic, not even anger. Just heartbreak. Cal stood slowly holding one of the letters, his voice low. You write to her like she's still here. Ruby set the box down gently. She is. At least she is when I'm scared out of my mind. He nodded. She sounds like she was someone worth remembering. She was. Ruby crossed her arms, defensive now. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I just didn't want anyone to see that part of me. The part that's human. The part that's afraid. Cal hesitated. Then he said, Fear doesn't make you weak, Ruby. It means you care enough to lose something. She blinked, looked down. I haven't told the girls about her. They think I was born knowing how to do all this. Like I woke up one day and just knew how to braid hair and make soup and sew torn sleeves. She smiled, a fragile thing. But the truth is, I just remember how she did it, every single day, and I pretend I know what I'm doing. He reached across the table and gently closed the tin lid. You don't have to pretend with me. Ruby's eyes flicked up to his. For a moment, silence filled the space between them, not empty, but full of things unspoken. Loss, love, guilt, and the slow rediscovery of trust. Then one of the girls, Lila, poked her head through the front door. Miss Ruby Sophie fell into the snowbank again, and she's pretending she's dead. Ruby rolled her eyes and let out a soft laugh. She's definitely your daughter. Cal grinned. No doubt. Later that evening after dinner, the girls gathered around the fireplace for story time. Cal read from an old book with frayed corners, while Ruby sat on the floor brushing knots from Sadie's hair. Sophie leaned against the arm of the couch, her sketchbook in her lap. She'd started drawing the girls one by one, then together. The newest page showed Ruby standing like a soldier, her arms stretched behind 6 stick figures holding hands. The title at the top read, Captain Ruby and Her Army of Little Hearts. Ruby didn't notice at first. Then Maisie whispered, She made you into a superhero. Ruby looked over. Her lips trembled, but she smiled. Sophie offered the page wordlessly. Ruby took it with both hands, staring at it for a long time. She thinks I'm brave. She's right, Cal said from his chair, voice calm but firm. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Ruby didn't speak. She simply leaned forward, pressed her lips to the top of Maisie's head and whispered, Maybe love makes us brave. That night, when the cabin was finally quiet, Cal found himself staring at the tin again. He picked it up, thumbed the lid, and then without opening it took a blank piece of paper from the kitchen drawer. He hesitated, pen in hand. Then slowly, deliberately, he began to write. Dear Molly, it's been a long time. I'm not sure if this will help, or if it's just something I need to do. But there's a woman here, and 6 little girls. And I think maybe for the first time in years, I've found something worth staying for. Something you would have smiled at the way you used to when Sophie danced with her socks on backward. He paused, then kept writing. Outside, the wind stirred the snow. Inside, 2 hearts, who had forgotten how to hope, had begun to speak in letters, never sent, and finally be heard. The sky turned gold over Montana that Saturday, casting long shadows through the pine trees and spilling soft light into the kitchen window, where Ruby stood, kneading bread again. Her sleeves were rolled high, and flour dusted her hairline like snow. 6 little voices chirped in the background, filling the house with that kind of chaos that strangely made it feel like a home. Cal leaned against the doorway watching her. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her movements were steady, methodical, but there was grace in them, like every fold of the dough carried something sacred. Not just survival. Ritual. Stability. Hope. He didn't interrupt. Not until Sophie's voice called from the hallway. Daddy turned. Yeah, she stood with her arms crossed, her chin tucked slightly down the way she always did when she was trying to seem braver than she felt. Can we talk? Like, just us? Of course. He motioned toward the porch, out there. She nodded. They stepped into the cool spring evening. The last of the snow had finally melted, and the breeze smelled like pine and damp earth. Cal sat on the top step, and Sophie stood beside him, arms wrapped around herself. She didn't speak for a minute. Cal waited. Then quietly she asked, "Do you love her?" He looked up at her. Sophie was staring straight ahead, her profile outlined in sunlight. She didn't say Ruby's name. She didn't have to. He exhaled slowly. That's a big question. I know. Where's it coming from? Sophie hesitated, just wondering. You look at her different, and you let her touch the old coffee pot. You never let anyone touch the coffee pot. Cal chuckled under his breath. You notice everything. I live here too, Dad. He nodded. All right, he said softly. Yeah, I think I do. Sophie didn't speak. But it's not what you think, Cal added quickly. It's not about forgetting your mom. It's not about replacing anything. She looked at him now. I'm still sad about Mom, she whispered. But I'm also not mad. That you might be happy again. His throat tightened. He reached out and took her hand. Sophie looked down at their fingers. She doesn't try too hard. Ruby, I mean. She doesn't try to be like Mom. No, she doesn't. And she's not afraid of you, or your quiet. She just makes space around it. Cal smiled. She does, doesn't she? There was another long pause. Then Sophie asked the one thing he hadn't seen coming. Do you think she'd stay? He blinked. What do you mean? I mean, do you think she'd stay? Like forever? Here, with us. Cal looked out at the trees. The wind moved through them like a hush. I don't know, he said honestly. That's not mine to decide. She's had to run her whole life, and staying, that's the scariest thing of all. But she's not running now. No, she's not. Sophie shifted on her feet. Maisie told me Ruby used to sleep sitting up, like for years, just in case she had to grab everyone and run. She said it made her back hurt all the time. Cal winced. I didn't know that. She only started lying down all the way a few weeks ago, Maisie noticed. Said Ruby finally trusts the floor not to disappear. He looked at Sophie, amazed again by how much this child had absorbed in silence. You like them, don't you? He asked. Sophie smiled. They're loud. And weird. And one of them stole my favorite pencil sharpener. But yeah, I like them. Cal reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're a good kid. I'm your kid. They sat together a little longer, the wind brushing gently against their thoughts. Then Sophie stood. I'm gonna go help Ruby. She burns the bread if she gets too distracted. Cal chuckled. She does that. Sophie turned back once at the door. Hey, Dad. Yeah. If she stays, would that be okay? He met her eyes. I think that would be more than okay. Later that night, as the moon rose silver over the trees, Ruby stood at the sink rinsing plates. Cal dried them beside her in the quiet rhythm they'd developed, easy companionable. "Maisie said you and Sophie had a long talk," she said, without looking up. Cal raised an eyebrow. She say that before or after she tried to put pickles on her oatmeal. Ruby smirked. "During," he laughed. "She asked if I loved you." Ruby's hand paused in the soapy water. "Oh," I said yes. Silence. "She also asked if I thought you'd stay." Ruby rinsed a plate and placed it on the drying rack. "And what did you say?" I said, "I don't know." "Because I don't." "Not really." He turned toward her. "But I want you to. Not because you owe us. Not because of the girls. But because I think maybe this place isn't just a cabin anymore. Maybe it's becoming a home. And homes aren't about roofs. They're about people you want to return to." Ruby looked down at the suds, her expression unreadable. "I've never stayed anywhere longer than 6 months," she said quietly. "Every time I thought I could breathe, something changed. A job ended. A landlord found out. A school asked too many questions." She looked up at him, eyes tired and searching. "I'm scared of roots, Cal," I know he said gently. "But maybe roots aren't traps. Maybe they're what holds you in place when the wind comes." Ruby's lip quivered. He didn't touch her, didn't reach. He just stood there, steady and sure. She reached for the dish towel in his hands and their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but it was real, and Ruby didn't flinch. She just whispered, "Maybe I'm tired of running." Cal nodded. "Then rest. We'll figure the rest out later." Outside in the little bedroom she now shared with Lila and Sadie, Maisie whispered to Sophie under the covers, "Do you think Ruby will be our forever mom?" Sophie smiled in the dark. "I think she already is." Maisie grinned, then turned over and drifted to sleep. And somewhere in the other room, a woman who had built a life out of leaving finally allowed herself to stay. The knock came just after noon. It wasn't loud, not aggressive, but it was the kind of knock that carried weight, deliberate, measured, official. Cal looked up from the workbench in the barn. His hands were covered in sawdust and pine sap, halfway through carving a simple toy boat for Maisie. It had become a ritual of sorts, quiet carving in the morning, family chaos in the evening. He wiped his palms on an old rag, stepped out into the sunlight, and saw the county car parked at the edge of the drive. Black sedan, government plates. One man in a navy windbreaker and khakis standing straight as a fence post clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Cal's stomach sank, not because he feared what would happen, but because Ruby did. The man spotted him, waved once. "Afternoon," he said. Cal nodded. "Something I can help you with, County Family Services. Name's Ron Peterson. I'm responding to a report filed about an unregistered foster situation in this area." "You Cal Bennett, I am." Peterson tapped his clipboard. "We've had a call. Could be nothing. But I'm here to follow up." Cal felt the air tighten around him. Inside the cabin, Ruby was probably already at the window. She'd know. Her whole body had been trained to recognize this kind of presence, the kind that didn't arrive to offer help, but to evaluate, to judge, to separate. He didn't want to make a scene outside. "Come on in," Cal said. "I'll get you some coffee." Ron Peterson looked like he was built for bureaucratic discomfort. Well-pressed shirt, awkward small talk, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ruby sat on the edge of the armchair, back straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Cal stood nearby, arms crossed. The girls were in Sophie's room with the door shut by design. They didn't need to hear this. So Peterson said, glancing at his clipboard, "Miss Hart? You're currently living here with 6 minor children who are not biologically related to you. Is that correct?" Ruby nodded. "Yes. And none of them have official guardianship paperwork filed in your name?" "No, sir. Any pending applications for foster care or adoption," Her voice wavered just slightly. No, he scribbled something down. And what about medical care school registration immunization records? Ruby swallowed hard. They have nicknames Mr. Peterson. 2 of them don't know their real birthdays. Lila hasn't seen a doctor since she was 4 because her mother was afraid she'd be taken away. Maisie doesn't even have a birth certificate. Peterson frowned. I understand that. But the state. The state wasn't there when I pulled Maisie out of a dumpster. She snapped, her voice rising. The state wasn't there when I taught Sadie how to sleep through the night without wetting herself from nightmares. I know you're just doing your job, but don't sit here and ask for records I was never allowed to have. The room pulsed with silence. Cal stepped in. These kids aren't being hidden. They're being protected. Peterson raised an eyebrow. Mr. Bennett, are you aware that housing unregistered minors without legal status could result in temporary custody removal or criminal charges under certain statutes? I'm aware, Cal said evenly. And I'm also aware they've had 3 meals a day since they got here. Heat, beds, clothes, safety. So if you want to talk about legality, we can do that after you acknowledge that someone is finally treating them like human beings. Peterson looked at both of them, then leaned back slightly. I don't want to tear families apart, he said, quieter now. But I can't pretend this isn't complicated. Ruby's voice came out low. It's not complicated. It's just not convenient. He looked at her, and for the first time there was something like respect in his eyes. I'll need to make a full report, he said. That's procedure. But I'll also be honest in it. And I'll recommend a formal path toward kinship guardianship. It's not fast. It's not easy. But it's a beginning. Ruby's fingers loosened just slightly. Cal asked, what does she need to do? Paperwork. Proof of stability. Letters of support. I'll write one, Cal said immediately. Peterson added, and ideally someone with legal standing willing to share guardianship responsibilities. It helps the case. Cal didn't blink. She has that too. Ruby turned toward him, stunned. Cal? But he kept his eyes on Peterson. Put my name on the line. I'll co-sign. Share whatever's needed. If she's not legal family, I'll make her one. Peterson stood slowly, his face unreadable. He looked between them and said almost softly, You 2 have something rare. Don't lose it in the paperwork. And with that, he left. The moment the door shut, Ruby sat down hard. Her hands trembled. Her breath shook. Cal crossed the room, knelt beside her. You didn't have to say that, she whispered. Yes, I did. You could get in trouble. Then I'll face it. Why he didn't answer at first. Just placed his hand over hers. Because somewhere between soup and story time and snow angels, he said you stopped being a guest. You became the reason this place feels alive again. She blinked hard, trying not to cry. And because he added gently, I'm done letting other people decide who's family. That night, as Cal tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at him with her serious eyes. Is Mr. Clipboard Man coming back? Maybe. But we're going to be okay. Sophie nodded, then said, You know, I think Ruby finally stopped looking at the door every 5 minutes. Cal raised an eyebrow. You noticed then? She smiled. I notice everything. He kissed her forehead. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. And outside, under a quiet Montana sky, a cabin built for one finally started to look like it could hold 8 hearts, and all the weight they carried. The pen hovered in Ruby's hand, just above the signature line, just above the place where her name, Ruby Hart, would be inked beside Cal's on the guardianship declaration. 1 stroke, and 6 little girls would no longer live in limbo. They'd belong, legally, permanently. But her fingers wouldn't move. The courthouse room was quiet except for the soft ticking of an old analog clock on the wall. A laminated poster about kinship care hung crooked near the window. Everything felt stale, institutional, as if this place had seen too many promises, broken, too many signatures made and revoked. Across from her, Cal sat steady, not pushing, not rushing, just there. "I'm sorry," Ruby whispered. Cal shook his head. "There's nothing to be sorry for." She looked down at the form again. Her name. His. 6 empty spaces for the names of children who had trusted her without a single piece of paper to prove they should. "This makes it real," she said. "It already is real. No, I mean, it makes it permanent. Like there's no exit door, no way out if I fail them." Cal leaned forward. "Ruby, you've already been permanent. They just didn't have the paperwork to match." Her hands tightened. "When I was little," she said, voice low, "my mom used to write our names on the inside of my coat, in Sharpie. In case you ever get lost," she said, "so someone will know where you belong." She looked at him, eyes damp. "I've spent most of my adult life being scared someone would write my name on a coat, tag me as the woman who thought love was enough and failed them anyway." Cal took a slow breath. "You haven't failed anyone. Not yet. Ruby." He reached across the table and tapped the paper with his finger. "See that line next to mine? You don't have to sign it for the court, or the system, or even the girls. You sign it if, and only if you believe you deserve to stay." That stopped her. She looked up, and for the first time there was no wall in her expression, just a worn, trembling kind of vulnerability, the kind people carry after years of hiding under strong faces. Then the door opened. Maisie peeked her head in. "Are you almost done? They said we could go to the diner after if it's all official." "I want the blue pancakes." Cal smiled. "We're working on it, sweetheart." Maisie stepped inside, walking straight to Ruby. She held out a piece of lined paper with something drawn in colored pencil. Ruby unfolded it. It was a house. Their house, with flowers in the front and a swing set in the back. 8 stick figures stood on the porch, smiling. Maisie had labeled each one with a name, and in big rainbow letters, above them all she'd written, "The Hart Bennett Family." Ruby blinked at the drawing, then turned it over. Maisie had written something in her crooked little scrawl. "If you sign it, does that mean we finally belong somewhere?" Ruby's breath hitched. She looked at Cal. He gave her the smallest nod. And then finally she signed. The girls burst into cheers when Ruby emerged with the signed form in her hand. Lila threw her arms around her waist. Sadie jumped up and down. Sophie high-fived Cal so hard it stung. They piled into the truck, loud and giddy, barely able to contain their excitement as they headed toward town. Ruby sat in the passenger seat, holding Maisie's drawing in her lap, like it was the Declaration of Independence. "You okay?" Cal asked, one hand on the wheel, eyes on the road. "I don't know," she said. "But I think I'm starting to be." He smiled. They reached the diner just after lunch rush, and the waitress, a woman named Pam who'd known Cal since he was a boy, raised her eyebrows when the party of 8 walked in. "Well," she said, "setting out extra menus. Either someone started a day camp or I've missed a whole chapter in your life, Cal." "Long story," he replied. Pam winked at Ruby. "I've got time." As they settled into the booth, Ruby noticed a small plaque on the wall, framed and faded. It read, "Family isn't who you come from. It's who shows up, stays, and loves you through the mess." She stared at it for a long time. Later that night, as the girls slept with full stomachs and sticky fingers from too much syrup, Cal stepped outside into the cool night air. Ruby joined him. They stood side by side, watching the stars blink to life above the pines. "You meant what you said in there?" she asked. "Which part?" "The part about not signing unless I believed I deserved to stay." Cal turned to her. "Of course. I didn't believe it," she admitted. "Not at first. But when Maisie gave me that paper, I thought maybe this isn't about deserving. Maybe it's just about choosing. She looked at him. And I choose to stay. Cal didn't speak. He just reached out, laced his fingers with hers. No fanfare, no declaration. Just steady warmth in the dark. Inside the cabin on the kitchen counter lay the guardianship form signed, notarized official. But next to it was another piece of paper, a drawing of a house. A swing set 8 stick figures, and one big word written in rainbow crayon. Home. The spring wind rattled the window panes gently that night, just enough to keep sleep from coming easily. Inside the small bedroom, Ruby now shared with Lila and Sadie, 3 shapes stirred beneath a patchwork of mismatched quilts, but only one remained awake. Maisie lay on her back, staring at the ceiling with wide, solemn eyes. The moonlight cast a soft glow across her face, illuminating the small crease between her brows, one that didn't belong on a 7-year-old. Ruby had kissed her goodnight. Twice. But still Maisie couldn't sleep. Something big was coming. She could feel it the way animals knew storms before the first drop fell. Tomorrow was the hearing, the real one. The one with a judge and papers, and people who didn't know anything about bedtime songs or which girl hated green beans. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake the others, and tiptoed out of the room. The floor creaked under her feet. She winced, but no one stirred. Just the quiet hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional sigh from the wood stove. She padded to the window seat, climbed up and curled into a ball, and then she folded her hands. Not the way she'd been taught in church. Truth be told, she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen the inside of one. But she remembered Ruby once whispering over a sick, "Lila, just say what's in your heart. Someone's always listening." So, Maisie whispered, "Hey, it's Maisie." Again. She paused. "I know I talk a lot. I don't mean to bug you. But tomorrow's the thing, right? The big thing where they say, if we get to stay, if we get to keep Ruby, if we get to keep this house and the dog and the purple cups we all like." Another pause. "I don't want new people. I don't want to go back to sleeping in cars or behind buildings that smell like soup. I like it here. I like that Cal doesn't yell. I like that Sophie teaches us how to draw noses right. I even like that Ruby makes us eat vegetables before dessert." "Kind of." She hesitated, then continued a little softer. "I know I'm just a kid. But if there's any way you could make tomorrow go good, could you do that? Not for me. For Ruby. She never asks for anything. But I see her pray when she thinks no one's looking. And I think maybe it's her turn to get what she asks for." Maisie paused, eyes closing. "And if it helps, I promise to never fake being sick again just to get a popsicle." The silence that followed was deep and soft and full of unsaid things. She fell asleep there in the window, knees tucked to her chest, cheeks pressed against the cool glass. Ruby found her an hour later. She stood in the doorway a moment, watching her smallest girl curled in the light of the moon. Then she knelt down and gently gathered her up in her arms. Maisie murmured something unintelligible, her head dropping to Ruby's shoulder. She weighed more than she used to, stronger, now growing. Fed. Safe. Ruby held her close for just a little longer than necessary. The next morning was quiet but tense. No one said it aloud, but the girls knew. They ate breakfast with unusual manners. Lila brushed her hair without being asked. Sadie set the table without being told. Even Sophie, usually composed, bit her lip nervously as she passed out plates. Ruby wore her old navy blue coat, the one she hadn't worn since arriving. It had once belonged to her mother. The seams had been restitched more times than she could count, but the weight of it grounded her. It made her feel like she could walk into courtrooms and still remember who she was. Cal wore his Sunday shirt, The white one. Pressed and tucked sleeves rolled just once at the wrist. He didn't say much, but he kept catching Ruby's gaze across the room with looks that said, "You don't have to carry this alone." At 9:12 a.m., they left. All 8 of them. The courthouse smelled like antiseptic and floor wax, the kind of place where hope felt out of place and optimism seemed naive. The girls sat in the hallway, legs swinging, whispering to each other, like they were in a library, made of concrete and caution tape. Inside the courtroom, Ruby stood with Cal beside her. The judge was older gray at the temples, glasses perched low on his nose. He read through the packet slowly, methodically. Then he looked up. "Ms. Hart. Mr. Bennett, you're requesting joint guardianship over 6 minor children, none of whom are biologically related to either of you. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Cal said. "And why now?" Ruby stepped forward. Her voice was steady. "Because paperwork shouldn't take this long to catch up to love." The judge blinked. Ruby continued. "These girls have been mine in every way that matters for years. But the world doesn't recognize what isn't stamped or signed or notarized. I'm here to fix that." The judge leaned back in his chair. "Foster care is a serious commitment. Permanent guardianship even more so. Why should the court believe you'll succeed where so many others fail?" Cal stepped up beside her. "Because we already are." He looked straight at the judge. "We're not perfect. But every day we get up and we do the work. The bedtime stories, the dentist appointments, the nightmares. We do it all. Not because we're obligated, but because we choose them. And they chose us back." The room was still. Even the court clerk had stopped typing. The judge looked down again, then nodded, once scribbled something and said softly, "Guardianship granted." Outside, as they exited the courthouse, the girls ran to meet them. Ruby barely had time to kneel before she was engulfed in a flurry of arms and laughter. Maisie clung to her neck. "Did it work?" Ruby nodded, smiling through tears. "It worked, baby. We're official." Maisie pulled back and beamed. "Then I want pancakes. Forever family pancakes." Cal laughed. "That's a new tradition, huh?" Maisie grabbed Sophie's hand. "You can make the faces with blueberries? I always make the faces." "Well, now you have to make 8. Ruby looked over at Cal, her heart full and aching all at once. "I didn't think I'd make it here," she said. He squeezed her hand. "We all made it here. Together." And as they walked to the truck under the high Montana sky with paperwork in hand, and hearts finally at peace, Ruby whispered into the spring breeze, "Thank you for listening to a little girl's prayer." And somewhere, maybe not far, at all, someone smiled back. Rain swept across the roof of the cabin in steady rhythms. That night, a spring storm that rolled in just as they pulled into the driveway. The clouds had held back until the last possible moment, as if even the sky had waited to weep until it knew they were safely home. Ruby stood under the porch awning, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe, her navy coat damp and clinging to her shoulders. The girls had scattered inside, laughing and slipping on the hardwood in their excitement. Sophie had shouted something about hot chocolate and marshmallows, and Cal had disappeared into the kitchen to oblige. But Ruby stayed where she was, listening, breathing, remembering. Inside her coat pocket was the court order. Signed, sealed, real. A stack of official papers that proved, at least in the eyes of the state, that they belonged to each other now. That she could tuck Maisie into bed and not fear a knock at the door. That she could answer Mother on a school form without pausing. But that wasn't why she couldn't move. She stood frozen because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of something. She was in it, surrounded by it, and her body didn't yet know what to do without the reflex of flight. Cal opened the door behind her. "You coming in?" he asked. She nodded but didn't move. He stepped beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "You okay?" I'm not sure she admitted. "It's strange." What is this feeling? Like I'm allowed to exhale. Cal smiled gently. You are. She turned to him, her eyes wide and searching. What if I don't know how? Then we'll learn together. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The rain softened to a patter. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Inside, laughter echoed from the hallway as Maisie shrieked about someone stealing her socks. Ruby exhaled. Just a little. The cabin felt warmer than usual that night. Not from the fire, though it glowed strong and steady, but from something deeper. Something intangible. The girls sat wrapped in blankets on the floor, sipping hot cocoa. Each had 2 marshmallows. Cal had tried to enforce a no more than 2 rule, but Maisie had bribed him with a drawing of him as a superhero with a spatula cape. He caved. Ruby sat on the couch with Sophie nestled under her arm. It still surprised her how easy the girl had fit there, like she'd been meant to all along. Sophie never called her Mom. Not yet. But the way she leaned in now, eyes, soft hands, still it didn't need a name. Sophie spoke softly. Can we do the candles tonight? Ruby looked at her confused. You know, the quiet ones. And then she remembered. Months ago, after a particularly hard week, Ruby had lit 3 tea candles and said each of these is for something we're thankful for, even if it's small. The girls had made it a tradition. She nodded. I'll get them, Sophie whispered, sliding off the couch. They gathered in the living room, dimming the lights. Cal brought out the candles, 7 now. 1 for each girl. 1 for Cal. And tonight, Sophie placed an 8th in front of Ruby. They sat in a circle on the floor. Maisie, of course, went first. I'm thankful for pancakes with blueberry eyes, she said proudly. Lila giggled. I'm thankful we don't have to pack up every week anymore. Sadie said, I'm thankful Ruby doesn't snore loud like Uncle Terry did. That earned laughter. Sophie looked at Ruby, smiled, and said, I'm thankful that my dad smiles. Again. Cal's throat worked, but he said nothing. Then Ruby. She held the unlit match for a long time before she struck it. I'm thankful, she said slowly, that I didn't run. The match touched the wick. The candle flared to life. Then Cal lit his. He looked around the circle, pausing on each face these girls who had wandered into his life like lost stars, and the woman who had brought them together by the sheer force of love. I'm thankful, he said softly, that family isn't something you find. It's something you choose. Later, after bedtime, routines and lullabies, and a ridiculous 10-minute standoff over who got the blue toothbrush. Maisie won. Cal stood outside again. This time, Ruby joined him in a blanket, their shoulders pressed together under the eaves. The rain had stopped. The night was clean and quiet. Ruby broke the silence. Do you think they'll remember this? Cal looked at her. What part? This time, this feeling, being safe. He thought for a moment. I think they'll remember the smell of hot cocoa, the sound of their names being called with kindness, the way your hands braid their hair without pulling, the quiet dinners, the loud breakfasts. He smiled. And I think someday when they're older, they'll wonder how you did it all. And they won't fully understand that you were learning as you went. Ruby leaned her head against his shoulder. And you, Cal shrugged. I'll remember the day I came home to a house full of strangers and realized they were the part of me I didn't know I was missing. She turned to him. That sounds like something out of a movie. He grinned. Well, I always liked a good ending. Ruby tilted her head. Maybe it's not the ending. No, maybe it's the part where the story begins again, just with more people in it. He nodded, his voice low. I like that version better. Inside, the candles still flickered on the mantel. 1 for each name. 1 for each heart. 8 flames in a place once built for 1. And outside, under the vast Montana sky, the stars didn't shine any brighter than usual. But somehow, they felt closer. The table was old, handmade, uneven, and stained with years of life. Sophie had once traced the knots in the wood with her fingers and said they looked like sleeping bears. Maisie had spilled grape juice on it. Twice. Lila had drawn a sun in the corner with yellow crayon, and no one had the heart to scrub it off. But today, it looked like something out of a magazine. A white linen cloth draped over the top, slightly wrinkled, but proud. Wildflowers picked by Sadie and Ruby at sunrise stood in mason jars like miniature fireworks. Plates mismatched in shape and color circled the table, and there were 8 napkins carefully folded, though none of them matched either. And in the middle, warm from the oven, sat a loaf of braided bread. Cal stepped back to take it all in. He rubbed the back of his neck and let out a low whistle. "Well," he murmured, "we cleaned up all right." "You forgot to button your top collar," Ruby said behind him, tying the last bow in Maisie's dress. Again, he turned, grinning. "Rebellion keeps me young." Ruby rolled her eyes but smiled. She was wearing a soft denim dress and a cream cardigan with a tiny tear in the left sleeve. Her hair was pinned back loosely, a few strands escaping to dance in the breeze. The girls were a whirlwind of color and excitement, braids and bows and Sunday shoes that had seen better days. Sophie had taken it upon herself to organize the ceremony, as they called it, and had been bossing everyone around for the last hour with the seriousness of a courtroom judge. Cal stood quietly as Ruby gathered the girls in a half-circle beneath the pine trees just beside the old table. A small sign dangled from a branch overhead. Sophie had painted it the night before with 3 big words in uneven letters, "Our Forever Day." Ruby stepped forward holding something in her hands. It was Maisie's drawing, the one she had given Ruby outside the courthouse weeks ago. Now it was framed in rough pine wood Cal had carved himself. She turned to the girls, her voice soft but steady. "I spent a lot of my life thinking I wasn't allowed to stay, that I wasn't someone people chose to keep. And maybe some of you felt the same way once, like your name was always temporary, like love had an expiration date." The girls were silent, watching her with wide, listening eyes. "But then we came here, and something changed. We didn't just find a roof or a warm bed. We found each other." She looked toward Cal. "I didn't believe in forever. But now, I think maybe forever doesn't have to be a promise. Maybe it's just a choice you make, every day. And we keep choosing." Cal stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I'd like to say something." The girls turned toward him. "I've fought fires that could burn down buildings. I've stood in places where everything felt like smoke and ruin. And I thought I'd seen the worst of it. But grief's the fire you don't see. It lingers, and I carried it a long time." He looked at Sophie, who gave him a quiet, knowing smile. "But you all, you're the water that put it out. You're the reason the walls got rebuilt. And you, Ruby," he reached for her hand, "you didn't just bring them here. You brought me back, too." The wind rustled softly through the trees. Then Maisie stepped forward. "I have a poem." Sophie looked surprised. "Since when?" "Since now," Maisie replied, proudly unfolding a crinkled sheet of paper. She cleared her throat dramatically. This house was just a cabin till Ruby made it warm. Then Sophie shared her blanket, and Cal kept us from harm. Now there's Coco every Sunday, and chores we sorta hate. But we have our own pajamas, and we always have a plate. So if you ask me who we are, we're not a normal crew, but we're 8 hearts with one last name, and that's our kind of true. The last line was met with a beat of silence, then laughter. Applause. Ruby covered her mouth, eyes shining. Maisie, Cal said, blinking, "You didn't tell us you were a poet." "I'm full of secrets," she said proudly. They sat around the table under the pines, the late afternoon sun dappling across plates and shoulders. Bread was broken, jam passed, stories told. Cal looked around at Sophie, leaning into Ruby's shoulder, at Lila trying to braid Sadie's hair, while chewing on a biscuit at Maisie, offering her crust to a red squirrel she'd named Tony. It was loud, and messy, and perfect. After dinner, Ruby stood and clinked her fork against her glass. "I have one last surprise." The girls gasped. Cal raised an eyebrow. She reached into a small wooden box and pulled out envelopes, each one with a girl's name, written in Ruby's neat looping script. "You're all official now, and that means you need something to show the world." She handed them out one by one. Inside each envelope was a certificate, simple printed on thick cream paper, with Cal's and Ruby's signatures at the bottom. The top read, "Welcome to the Hart Bennett family. You are loved. You are chosen. You are home." The girls stared in awe. Maisie looked up. "Do I have to carry this with me?" "No," Ruby said, kneeling in front of her. "You carry it in here." She placed a hand over Maisie's chest. "In your heart." As the sun sank behind the trees, casting the forest in gold and amber, Ruby and Cal stood together, watching the girls chase fireflies between the pines. He slipped his hand into hers. She leaned into him. "I never dreamed of this," she said quietly. "Me neither. And now I can't imagine anything else." "Funny how life works," Cal murmured. "It breaks you open, just wide enough to let something better in." They stood like that until the stars began to bloom overhead, and laughter echoed through the clearing like music. Not every story ends with a grand gesture. Some end here at a worn table, under the trees, surrounded by mismatched dishes, poems from a 7-year-old, and the quiet miracle of belonging. And that was more than enough. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know. Leave us a comment and share a little about yourself. It's always a joy to hear from kind souls across the globe. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. We share stories like this every week. Stories of compassion, second chances, and the quiet miracles that remind us what truly matters. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care, be kind, and keep believing in goodness.